Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is on Food Waste Action Week, Transforming Surplus into Opportunity, brought to you by our professional affiliate members, Argon & Co. First of all, thank you to everyone for coming today. We hope that you find the content useful. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please put any questions that you have into the questions box, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can at the end. We'll also be sending an aftercare email in the next couple of working days. This will contain a recording of the webinar, a copy of the slides, and the contact details of today's presenters. So, without any further ado, I'll pass you over to our host for this webinar, Rachel Mead.
Thanks, Luke, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this hour-long session today. It's great to dive into such an important topic as food waste on WRAP's Food Waste Action Week. And we'll be looking at transforming surplus into opportunity. So over the next hour, we've got three speakers who I'll introduce in a moment. We hope to give you some practical strategies and examples of really good work in this space, as well as hopefully leaving you with some inspiration. So the format of today, we're going to have our three speakers presenting for the first 40-45 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A panel with our speakers for the next 15 minutes. So as Luke mentioned, feel free to add your questions as we go through on the panel, and then we'll address them later in the call. So let's start with some introductions. I'm Rachel Muse. I'm a principal consultant at Argon & Co. With a background in FMCG supply chain. And I work in our sustainability team. Recently, I've worked on several projects relating to food waste in its different forms, and that's kind of the inspiration behind wanting to put on this session for you today. I'm joined by three great speakers. James Watson from Argon & Co. Is a partner with the firm, and he'll be sharing some insights from over a decade of experience working with retailers and grocers. Then Dan Byam-Shaw, who's the policy lead from the Felix project. Dan is standing up the policy unit at the Felix project and really doing great work to champion systemic change in this space. And finally, Steve Thomas, who's the co-founder and CEO of Ample, which is a B2B marketplace for surplus farm food. And he's going to share around how their tool leverages technology and also is a commercial model for good. So a few context slides before we move on. I wanted to introduce who Argon & Co are, as I know many people, we might be new to you. So we are a business consultancy. We specialize in operations, strategy and transformation. And we work with clients across different sectors, but especially in the food and beverage sector, from topics such as resilience and supply, sustainability and decarbonisation, operational efficiencies and end-to-end reducing costs. And we're moving into the data and AI space and really finding some practical strategies to use and get the value out of AI rather than just having it as a bit of a gimmick. We're a global consultancy. As you can see, we've got a footprint across the globe, but James and I come from our London office. So back to the topic for today. Of course, we all know food waste is a big challenge. Just a few stats from WRAP here. In the UK, almost 11 million tonnes of food are wasted each year, which is absolutely staggering. And of course, that has both financial and environmental impacts. So greenhouse gas emissions associated with food waste are over 5% of the UK's total carbon footprint, which again, quite a shocking statistic. Where does food waste occur? As you can imagine, it's right across the value chain from farm to fork. The largest proportion happens in our homes, in households, with the rest being split fairly evenly between kind of farm, manufacturing, food service and retail areas. I'll caveat this just by saying that the farm statistic is the least developed and the least researched area, so that could be significantly higher. And what can we do about food waste? I think many of you will be familiar with the food and drink hierarchy for food waste, which helps us as a framework to understand what you should be doing with surplus food, from the most preferable option all the way down to the least preferable, which is of course disposal, especially in landfill. Today we're going to be focusing on those top two segments in prevention, as we try and move food from lower in the hierarchy towards the top. So James is going to be diving into how we prevent that food waste from happening in the first place. And Dan and Steve are going to be looking at redistribution to people. So on that note, I will hand over to James now to talk about his area.
Okay. I think I've managed to sort the tech. Morning all. Yeah, so the director said, my name is Jim Thompson. I'm one of our partners in Argon Co. I specialise in the food and drink or grocery sector, and I've spent virtually all of my career either on the supplier side or on the retailer side within grocery. So that sort of gives me a good view end to end of where decisions or choices are being made that drive food waste, amongst other things, clearly. Right, so I'm really gonna drill. I've gone too far. How do I get back? Previous. That's so. Not mastered the tech after all. There we go. Right, I'm going to start within manufacturing. So the reason for that is clearly people on the call are primarily suppliers, and if we're talking about where we can do and what can we do with waste, I want to start with what you can actually directly control yourself, because I think that is where you will move the needle first. It will generate momentum and then build energy and passion behind this. That being said, some of the bigger levers, and we'll talk about this in a second, come from collaborating with the retailers and other partners in the supply chain. So within manufacturing, with the top, so within, these are things you can challenge and often introduced within the product specification. So you see this particularly in the own labels, that top one where we have specifications for products. Often when own label suppliers with multiple retail customers, or multiple products with the same retailer, you will have similar products such as multiple different types of mayonnaise or different slice thicknesses of tomato. I worked with a sandwich manufacturer that had over, I think it was 12 different thicknesses, slices of tomatoes going into one customer's products. You know, obviously these are changes that are perceivable to the customer, but every time we have to change the gauge on the cutters, there's an additional level of waste. There's additional surplus that is produced to feed the line that is required. All of those additional changes in the specification, or those levels of specification, drive issues and cost and food waste, and ultimately might come from a good place, but in reality doesn't make a big difference to the end user. On the next one, so looking at byproducts, so I think the one that springs to mind on that, so often, so again, I will use another sandwich example, but from when you're making sandwiches, no one uses the ends of the loaf in a sort of commercial sandwich or buy in a supermarket, but the work that M&S did, so that I think, and the toast beer, if anyone had that, that was from the ends of loaves, so that was the malt being used in breweries, because obviously every time you make about 20 used slices in a loaf, so for every 10 sandwiches that you buy in a supermarket, there are 2 ends, and therefore quite a lot of that malt could be used, and it's otherwise going to food waste, or being repurposed for anaerobic digestion, etc. So can you work with the commercial teams in-house to find uses for those byproducts? And again, the other sort of most obvious one, I suppose, that might come to mind, most visible is the sort of wonky fruit and veg that's become quite fashionable, or certainly become quite popular. There's a number of businesses that have set up around that wonky fruit and veg example. The next one is possibly the least exciting, perhaps it is one of the most impactful, I would say. So actually having really good, thorough, robust data collection and the right KPIs to give you a true view of waste and where waste is. So often, and within factories, people talk about performance versus standard, so measuring versus what the expected amount of food waste or loss is during production. that is a totally sensible and normal thing to do. It motivates the operational team, it gives them a view of how they're performing versus what is their normal level of performance. However, it does conceal where the true loss is. And after a while, and the knowledge of what that standard is, becomes lost in the day-to-day. And there are a number of places I've gone where work with a supplier who was chasing in their view, a 20 grand a year opportunity of lost yield in cucumber. And chicken, they were above target. But what that concealed was, because they had a cook loss associated with chicken, and they had an allowable amount of giveaway, and they were chunks of chicken, so they were finding it hard to get the exact weight. It actually was concealing a £600,000-700,000 loss in chicken that they could tackle, and that's sort of one of those examples of where the standard, while helpful day to day, they can conceal that. So I would advocate for making sure you've got, yes, the standards, but also a view of what the true or total loss to perfect every time is. Now, clearly you can't always get it, but you don't want to lose sight of it, and these things do otherwise disappear. And then down to the last one, so yield optimizations or key ingredients. So yes, during cooking, again, protein cooking, I think often coming from a good place, proteins are often cooked to make sure they are 100% safe. Clearly not advocating making things unsafe, but I think from a lack of operational control, we often end up overcooking to be sure that what we are producing is safe. Now, in the example of cooked proteins, what that means is we are overcooking, so there is more water or moisture loss or fat loss, etc., from the product, which actually makes the product drier, tougher, not taste as nice. But also, we are having to use a lot more input ingredient to achieve the same end product. So if we can work with suppliers, we'll work on our internal processes, guaranteeing a more consistent input ingredient. We can then better control and work with the technical teams to make sure that we are cooking to the right and safe level, but not overcooking. And that is massively beneficial for, yes, our P&L, but also for the consumer, because they'll be much happier with the quality of the product we are producing. And then I suppose on giveaway, I think this one can often be, it is usually fairly well controlled, I would say, with the factories. People that sort of give away. So if we are making a 200 gram pasta salad or something like that, do we get exactly 200 grams in? While that isn't food waste as such, what often happens is when we're getting that tight with, I've seen it in a yogurt factory, if we are underweight and we go below a certain point, because we're controlling that really tightly, that underweight, the cost of bringing that all the way back around through the line and reworking it doesn't make sense. But also from a hygiene perspective, once it's gone a certain point, we can't bring it all the way back around to the start of the process. And so they had got to a point where they were accepting a certain percentage of underweight, which was a huge proportion. It was actually an awful lot of food, a very low percentage for them, but it's a lot of food that was just being passed through and ending up as underweight. Now, thankfully, in this example, actually a lot was being redistributed. But for them, it was a question of, well, can we work with the engineering team to understand, well, what was it about the depositors and the way the depositors were set up? And when we got stuck into it and the root cause, you could see that as the depositors were coming towards the end of their fill, the pressure down on the depositor was lower, and therefore a lower amount was being deposited into each pack, and therefore on average we were getting more of those true underweights towards the end of the run. Now, small adjustment with the engineering team, built something around that, made a few tweaks to the way the kit worked, we were able to resolve that. But again, that's the sort of thing that can get lost in the detail over time as an accepted or normal issue for a site. And again, it was built into standards. To go back to the previous point, it was built into standards and therefore was a normal or accepted problem. So those are the ones that sort of sit within manufacturing. I've pulled out a few more that are a bit more wider reaching. So the one that goes all the way across, and some of these are slightly overlap, the one that goes all the way across, that data sharing to improve forecasting. So clearly, there are commercial reasons why some data can't be shared between suppliers, manufacturers, retailers, etc. But the more we can and the more comfortable we can, and a sort of increasing use of suppliers putting implants into retailers to give better visibility of data, the better we can order, plan, not overproduce, particularly in products such as ready meals, where we have quite a lot of WIP ingredients throughout the process, such as sauces, cooked pasta, etc. The more data we are able to and feel comfortable sharing, the better we are able to manage those pockets of WIP through the process and then not overproduce or overorder, and eventually things end up going in the bin. Down in the bottom, so I think the one sort of reaching back up into the primary suppliers and into the farms, I would say this is where you need the retailers but also the farmers to work together, except an example might be a seasonal soup. So it is very, very hard for farmers to get exactly the right amount of crop, no more, no less. Clearly, it's a natural product, massive variation in temperature, humidity, rainfall, etc. And therefore, it's very hard to do that. As a result, when they suddenly get a sudden glut of broccoli, say 1 year, if that is too much and there's no end customer use for it as broccoli on its own or into other products, could that be turned into a seasonal soup and make that much more reactive to what happens? So rather than knowing at the start of the season we are going to make a broccoli soup, we're going, look, whatever we get a glut of, we will turn into a seasonal soup, which will be based on what has been a good crop this year. That sort of collaboration has been done and can be hugely valuable, and because you're producing not only a tasty product, you're producing a crop that's had a good year, but also it's cheap because it's a surplus and this is an ingredient that otherwise the farmers are probably ploughing straight back into the field. Going over to the right hand side, so packing formats. So this is sort of where you see that benefit is into the retailers and into homes. So Sainsbury's went first with one example recently with vacuum packing mince. Initially a little bit of backlash, but actually people have got used to it. It's sort of 2 days extra shelf life, which makes a massive difference to the retailer and to consumers and homes to reduce food waste. And also it's a smaller pack, so it packs better and there's less carbon. There's also a lot less plastic. I can't remember exactly what the stat was, but it was more than half the plastic that goes into that product as well. And so there will be other examples of that, but can we work with retailers, do consumer surveys, and understand not just formats to reduce the amount of plastic, but also the formats to improve and increase shelf life, which reduces the waste in those parts of the supply chain as well. And then I think the last one I'll talk about, so we sort of match consumer needs to pack formats. So often within suppliers, I've seen sort of, might have heard net revenue management or revenue growth management, where we are optimizing pack size for price and to get the right pounds per kilo or pounds per 100 grams, whatever it is, for a product so they compare well to other suppliers on the shelf. Great, good use of that that process, that insight. However, often what I think is neglected is, well, what size does the consumer actually end up wanting and using at home? So that stat that Rachel had about the biggest loss being in home, some of that you can't fix clearly, but often it's because the size of the product is too big for what the consumers are using it for. So actually, if we could work out going right into homes to understand, well, this is the right pack size for that consumer, they would have a size, not have surplus, not have excess, but also it would help us hit a better price point. One more slide from me and then I will hand over. So just as sort of 3 things to leave you with. Best place to start, make sure you have that good quality data to work from. Ideally have total loss, that's what you need, and then you can zero in where that waste is occurring and what you can do about it. Tackle what you've got control of first. Some of these things are all within the 4 walls of your business, and therefore you can do all on your own. But I do emphasize that the engaging your partners either up or downstream in your supply chain is where you have the biggest benefit. And so do find ways of trying to get them all aligned, and where projects exist. So actually some great work with FareShare and the Coronation Food Project recently, where you have those projects with that sort of more unified purpose between different businesses and different organisations, you can have a much bigger impact. And Dan is going to give us a few examples, I believe, of some of the policies he's looking at, which will greater push people to do the right thing in this space. That, I think, is everything from me.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Some really great examples there. Are you okay to click onto the next slide, and then we'll hand over to Dan?
There we go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Dan from the Felix Project. We are a food redistribution charity, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things we're doing to help tackle food waste by that second part of the food waste hierarchy, redistributing to people, and then a little bit about some of our ideas for broader systemic change as well. So yeah, very briefly, we set the Felix Project up in 2016 in memory of my younger brother Felix, who you can see on the screen, who died in 2014. We're looking to do something very positive in his memory, and our vision is for a London where no good food is wasted and no one goes hungry. Equal parts environmental and social. This is the food waste hierarchy, which we've already seen, and we've heard some great content from James about that top bullet point, preventing waste of raw materials. I'm going to be speaking about redistribution to people, but before I do, I think my question is going to pop up. Great, yes. So what percentage of surplus food do you think is actually redistributed to people? So this is what the government tells us we should be doing as a priority afterwards. But how much is actually redistributed to people? I'll give you a few seconds to have a think about it. You've got some options: 1, 5, 10, 20, or 50%. There we go. Okay, wow, the results popped up. That's brilliant. So most of you are saying 5%, some saying 1, 10, and 20. Well, actually 21% of you nailed it. The answer is 1%. Only 1% of surplus food is actually redistributed to people. So very well done for those of you who got that right. There we go. Yes, so this is what I call the food waste reality using RAPS data. This is what actually happens. So it's supposed to be an upside down triangle with the broad part on the top, but in fact, it looks much more like this in reality, where the greatest part is going to recovery and to disposal, recycling, and animal feed. The animal feed chunk is quite good, actually. That's probably one of the better parts that's closer matching what it is, but we want it to look the other way around. So I'm gonna, in just a few minutes, tell you a little bit about some broader policy solutions that I think can help us achieve the hierarchy in reality. But yeah, I want to quickly just tell you a bit more about the practical nature of what we do. So we rescue food from about 300-ish suppliers from all over the country. Some of our biggest partners are people like Able & Cole, Amazon, HelloFresh, Mindful Chef, Yoplait, Ocado, Sainsbury's, people like that. And yeah, last year we redistributed almost 16,000 tons. We take this food from all over the supply chain and redistribute it to our network of around 1,200 community organizations. And I think probably the thing that surprises people the most is that 48% of what we do is fresh fruit and veg. I think when people think food banks, they think of kind of what we call cupboard staples, tins, jars, etc., that last a long time. But actually, the bulk of what we do is fresh. And yeah, this is a picture of us in action. We also mobilized big teams of volunteers to go and pick apples that would otherwise have been going to waste at a farm in Kent due to the failure of the market, essentially. So I always think it's nice to show some photos of what we actually do. This is where the food ends up going. So we deliver to over 1,200 what we call community organizations, charities and schools, basically all kinds, conventional food banks, but also specialist centers dealing with particular communities. It might, for example, be a rehabilitation center or a holiday club for children or a homeless shelter. We really cover a huge different range of organizations across all 32 boroughs. I have a duplicate slide here that I'm going to skip. And yeah, this is an example of one of the community organisations we deliver to, the Refectorio Felix, which we actually helped set up in Earls Court. And I like showing this slide as well, because as well as getting to see our driver Duncan with some of the staff of the Refectorio, you can see the carrots. And these were carrots that were rejected because they didn't meet cosmetic specifications. You can see they're a little bit like little witch's fingers rather than the shape of a carrot you might see in a supermarket, but they are still, these are actually organic ones as well, so really high quality food that would otherwise have been wasted. This is a team of volunteers working in our kitchen. We're very proud of our kitchen in Poplar, where we cook around 5,000 meals a day using surplus food. Those meals will be packaged up into individual boxes and then sent out to charities. We prioritize these going to places like homeless shelters where they might not have very good cooking facilities. So if we send them a whole load of celeriac and courgette, they're not going to be able to use it. If we send them ready-made meals, they'll absolutely be able to use them. So going to finish just by going back to this idea of the food waste reality and how we might be able to get more food out of these lower sections into redistribution to people. And these are some of the ideas that I have at the moment that lots of other people have also been talking about. You've probably heard about the first one, I expect, the idea of mandatory food waste reporting for businesses coming in. There was a hugely positive response to DEFRA's consultation on this a few years ago, and it looked like it was going to happen. Unfortunately, the decision happened to be taken during that strange 40 days in which Liz Truss and co were in charge of the company, and basically it was rejected on broadly philosophical ideological grounds rather than actually an assessment of what people wanted and whether it would work. So we think the mandatory food waste reporting would really make a big difference by improving transparency and enabling businesses that are already doing a great job to really shout about that, about what they're doing to reduce and then redistribute waste. Secondly, we think that introducing tax incentives for businesses to donate their surplus food could have a really big impact. Businesses can already get tax relief for donating money and equipment, but not for donating food. In other countries where they do have such incentives, like the US, it's made a really big difference. And just by making it marginally better economically to donate surplus than to send it to anaerobic digestion, we could really tip the balance and make a huge impact. We think that there's still a little bit of uncertainty around legal liability for donated surplus. One thing that we often hear from suppliers is what would happen if someone down the line got ill after eating a sandwich that has our brand's name on it, and businesses are, right to be worried about that reputational risk. And whether there might be legal liability. We think that there already is legal protection in place under UK law, but it's in a couple of different sources and it's very unclear. So we are asking the government to produce some clarification on that. And then finally, the sustainable farming incentive has been in the news a bit recently, unfortunately, the scheme has been suspended for the moment, but we do think that there might be an opportunity for, in the new iteration of the scheme that the government are supposedly developing, that they could include support for redistribution at a farm level in these government incentives. In other words, farmers could be paid for ensuring that their surplus crops are getting redistributed to people. And that could be one of the actions for which they could claim subsidy. That is my time. But I just wanted to finish by saying that if any of you do have food going to waste in your business that you're looking for a home for, please do get in touch. Our email address is nice and simple, supply@thefelixproject.org, and we'd be more than happy to have a conversation and see if we might be able to help. So I'm going to click on to the next slide and hand over. Rachel, I can see you've popped back up, so thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, that was really inspiring seeing everything that you do at the Felix Project. So thank you for sharing. And now we're going to hand over to Steve to talk about his business, Ample.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. Just to introduce myself as we start, my name is Steve Thomas, and I'm a relative newcomer to your world of food. And actually, interestingly enough, I came into it in the Felix Project, where I, during COVID, was responsible for a technology transformation. By background, I'm a marketer and technologist, So I worked with Felix in that, and then for a period was the interim chief exec. And in a way, it was that experience with if you like, the food industry's dirty little secret. Perhaps it's not so little and not so secret, as Dan points out, that only 1% of that surplus, less than 1% of the available surplus, is redistributed. And I found that was appalling. I think that's I'd go beyond the words used so far. And I think it's a scandal that between us all, we're not able to do better than that. So some of those policy ideas I think were brilliant. I've just seen. But one of the things that also was clear to me at the Felix is that with a donated model, you're always going to be limited, because businesses, growers, I'm going to talk today a little bit about our main target, which is food surplus on farms. It's difficult to expect them to pay more to harvest and pack and distribute food for free. So at Ample, we want to get above the 1%. In fact, as you'll see, we want to go substantially beyond the 1% by enabling the growers, the farmers, to sell that food, to create a market and a number of opportunities that revalues food, which is otherwise being thrown away in that upturned hierarchy, by putting a value back on it. It's not of zero value, and we can do better if we use commercial ideas to actually get a price for it. Then we'd get above 1%. And that's the message, that's the hot message I came out of Felix with, and it's caused me now to lead to Ample. Ample is a social business. I'll tell you a bit more about it in a second and how we address that challenge. But first, without hopefully reiterating everything that's been said, I want to just put my finger back on why this system in which we have been operating and which has evolved in the last 3 or 4 decades is failing. We waste 26,000 tons of good food every day. Well, big deal. What is 26,000 tons of food? Think of 1,000 big lorries every day full of food, and think of those trucks. That food is worth £50 million every day. That's a big commercial waste that I think we could do something about. I'm interested in doing something with £50 million worth of food. Secondly, all of that waste, which is 20 billion a year when you add it up, amounts to 6% of our carbon emissions. That's quite a target to go at. If we can even get that down from 6 to 5, that's a substantial contribution to the net zero agenda. And finally, something that you may not know, in amongst all this, as I'll point out again in a second, where does that waste end up? Well, some of it is in restaurants, a lot of it is in the home, as you saw earlier, but the second biggest amount is on the farm. And it is a dirty little secret that farmers throw it away, burn it, plough it back in, and actually 25% in some cases of crops are unsold. And it's that Ample is all about targeting. In fact, our purpose is to help solve what I think clearly is a food crisis. It has impacts, of course, on health and nature and sustainability in every way, and health, human health. But it's the food, as Henry Dimbleby often says, if you want to address those problems, start with the food. That's where we're starting. So just to go back to that slide, I love this one. Thank you, James, for these slides. The big red lozenge in the home is 60% of our food waste. The second biggest, which is our target, is on the farm. This estimate says 1.6 million tons. Because food waste is not properly measured or tracked, as we've heard, there are various estimates on this, from 1 million tons to 3 million tons, because no one really knows what happens if it doesn't leave the farm gate. But what we do know is that it's a lot. It's the second biggest target, and it's easier to access in bulk if we can find ways to get the money moving so that it's worth the growers harvesting the food and not wasting it. Okay, so at this point, I think I've got a couple of quiz questions for you, just to see what you think about this. You might actually have heard this from me already, so there's been a clue if you've been listening. What is the exact proportion of UK food waste that never leaves the farm? Vote now, as they say on Millionaire. Oh, it looks like you have been listening. I can see the results coming up. I get the advantage as a presenter of seeing the numbers. A bit like Jeremy Clarkson. Shall we close that there? Yeah, you're right. I described it earlier as 25% on some farms, but overall it's a huge proportion if the small numbers are correct. So you can see, I think we should do something. Let's go on to my second question, which is addressing the situation of the farmers. They're living in a world where they're carrying a large proportion of the industry's surplus and they're not able to sell it. Their profit margins are demoralized and disintegrated over 30 years. Not that I feel that sorry for farmers, but I do in this case. A lot of them are thinking of leaving the industry. The results of a recent survey by the NFU was not only worried about the levels of stress, mental anxiety and suicide, so they asked their farmers, their members, how many are considering leaving the industry. I can see you're voting away. Thank you, everybody. And the answer is, from you, half of you think it could be as much as 50%, and about a quarter of you think it's a quarter of farmers. Now, actually, it's 50%. Half of farmers are thinking of leaving. They're already grubbing their orchards. They're converting fields into solar panels. They're changing farm buildings into Airbnb lets. Farming is so risky, and they're left with the waste. They're left with the if you like, the muddy end of the stick in this industry. And what we're about is to try and get them a better deal. I don't feel like I'm going to be Robin Hood for farmers, but there's an opportunity here to do the right thing and to use commercial models to help drive doing the right thing. So what's going wrong? Why are they getting that proverbial wrong end of the stick? Well, firstly, you saw some short-looking carrots earlier. These beautiful tomatoes in this greenhouse are looking pretty good to me, but there's still a significant proportion of every single crop that doesn't meet the cosmetic requirement to fit in the packaging system that the supermarkets use. Should we blame the supermarkets? I don't know. I don't think people, you're all on this call, I guess there's some retailers here. I don't think you're nasty, fundamentally unpleasant, evil people. In fact, you're responding to our consumer preferences by giving us back the shape, size, color, and texture and look of the products that we've indicated that we want, or maybe that you've convinced us that we want, because those specifications are a killer, and they mean that there's an automatic surplus of up to, well, 18% on average, but sometimes more in controlled environments like a greenhouse. It can be 20–30% actually in some cases. Peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, all of those crops that need to be picked on a regular basis. We need to change that. We need to, or at least we need to find a way to avoid it, exactly as James was saying. Gluts and flushes of high volume crops with our weather and our climate are an issue. Turning it into soup, James, is a solution. And one of the things we're about here is to anticipate that and to be ready to do something about it, to provide the mechanism. It's no good. You may have seen the news a few weeks ago. There was a whole bunch of cauliflowers. Supermarkets chose this winter to buy their cauliflowers from Spain, not from the UK, because last year they weren't enough. And suddenly we had a glut of cauliflowers in the middle of winter. No one knew what to do about it. Most of them were wasted. But we have to prepare for gluts. It's no good thinking we'll deal with it when we deal with it. It's the forgotten 20%. No, it's criminal. It's a scandal. And finally, the supply chain as a whole, I believe, is unfair, it's inequitable, and as I've said already, it's the growers that get left with dealing with the problem. So what about us? What are we here to do? Well, we describe ourselves, we're a little startup. We can't change the world. But we have lots of friends. Everybody I've ever spoken to with these messages that I'm giving to you is right up there with to say, yeah, good luck to you. Let's make a change. So we consider ourselves an alliance. We're trying to encourage everybody to do the right thing. We hate waste and want to take practical action. We want to put the growers back in control because they're not. They have to take prices. But at the same time, we can offer prices that are about half the wholesale prices for that surplus that we can move. And we want to see it more equitable. That would be our goal. Sure, we need to make some money ourselves to oil the wheels, but we're a social business primarily. We equivalize our goals, if that's a word, to the Sustainable Development Goals. Our aim is, we've got ambitious aims. We want to rescue up to 7% of UK farm waste, or to facilitate that rescue. We're not going to move it through our warehouses because we don't have any, but we think our marketplace and our soon-to-be kitchen will be able to boost from 1 to 7% farm waste. Secondly, that would equate to 250,000 tonnes at least of CO2 emissions, depending which multiple you use, and that would put nearly £200 million of revenue back in the pockets of the growers that they simply don't have at the moment. That makes a difference to the bottom line of UK agriculture. So yeah, a bit of ambition there. I've already mentioned our marketplace. It's pretty straightforward. I'll summarize it in a second before I finish. I won't dwell on it here. And for this year, we're also planning to put our money where our mouth is and to build a substantially large kitchen making millions of meals, low cost, high value, nutritious meals for schools and hospitals predominantly. We can't afford to compete with the commercial opportunities, but in those markets, we think there's a great deal to be had from surplus. Here's the marketplace. How does it work? In a nutshell, we've used Simple Tech. It's based on a standard e-commerce backend, but we allow a marketplace, Amazon style, to exist. So sellers upload and price their own products, manage their own inventory, and the buyers can either browse and buy Amazon style, but typically, I have to say, buyers are more interested in consistent, regular supply. And surplus doesn't have to be now and then. Surplus doesn't have to be 50 kilos, 50 tons, I mean, this week. Actually, many surpluses, like those greenhouses, are available weekly, week in, week out, 10 tons here, 10 tons there. So the idea of program buying is available. And behind our front end website, we are setting up 6-month programs for all sorts of buyers who are interested in this low cost, high value, fresh surplus. Our job is to make it all work, to take away the gnaws of finding a buyer, of finding a seller, to make it available, to set up the program, to move the money and to deal with the invoices. If we sell your food for you, then we will do the invoicing and you will get the money back within 2 weeks of us collecting it for you. And there's little credit, up to 2 weeks at if you're a seller, we will not allow buyers to take more than 2 weeks credit. That's the deal. So that's how we use the tech and how we leverage it. I think this is my last slide, just goes to make the final point. Don't think surplus is near the end of its life. British fresh surplus is fresher than the produce purchased from Spain and the Netherlands, which has taken 3 weeks to get to you. This was on the vine or the tree 3 days ago. So it's better. It might be wonky or too big or too small, but the quality is just as good. I think that's me. I've gone on a little bit. Sorry for the overrun. Rachel, back to you.
No worries at all. Great to hear from you, Steve. So if I can just ask Luke to stop sharing the slides now and ask our speakers, James, Dan and Steve, to join me on camera. And then we will get into a Q&A. So for those on the call, you should be able to add questions in the panel, and we will be able to see those and address those as we go through. So do feel free to do that. I'll kick us off for now though. So James, if I can start with you. You shared a little bit about some great examples of work to reduce food waste. But what do you see as the main challenges that businesses have on actually turning these into actions and going from great ideas to implementing them?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yes, I think it's interesting. So often the food waste washes up in the factory. That's where you see it. That's where it's visible. That's who has a KPI for it. It's their responsibility, and they do great work managing that and doing the best they can within their control entirely. We talk a lot about collaboration across the supply chain, but actually, I think even within businesses, that would be a great place to start. Would be how do you encourage the technical team, the commercial team, the procurement team even at times to work together and feel a joint accountability for food waste? We didn't talk about technical earlier, but there's great examples I've seen technical teams making adjustments to what is allowable based on some more rigorous testing that then enable some of that waste to be used and move that direction to the ops team don't have the remit to do on their own. So I think it's how do you get all of the functions collectively to feel responsible when traditionally what's set up as the KPI is purely within ops or manufacturing.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's really that kind of more holistic view of food waste rather than the silos of exactly where you see that food waste come out. And I think that also comes through where we saw that a lot of food waste happens in the households. Do you see that businesses also have a role to play there?
Into households, yeah. And retailers are doing things recently with removing sell-by dates or use-by dates because households were throwing away perfectly good food because it had tripped over the date. And actually, while it might be annoying when we buy multiple packs of peppers and I can't remember which one we bought last in my fridge, which happens every week, and I still haven't learned, it does teach you to look at the food and understand and inspect. But there's probably an education piece as well into homes to help people understand this is what off food looks like. This is when it is not safe. Because I think that is, while we've taken one step, I think there's more education that could be done into homes to help people understand that.
Great. And I know, Dan, that's something that the Felix project do as well. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in terms of the household waste. Yeah, definitely. We've done a really interesting piece of work recently with Re London, who are doing a big campaign called Eat Like a Londoner, and they've developed this really powerful graphic that I love of basically a blender with loads of £20 notes in it, which really trying to emphasise the financial impact of food waste in people's homes. I was really struck by the stat that you shared earlier, Rachel, that broke down the economic value of food waste per person. I think it was 200 and something pounds per person. I think thinking in those terms can be a really powerful tool. We also go in and do assemblies in schools, which is great fun talking to kids about food waste, because kids love talking about waste because they really understand it and they get the unnecessariness of it. I think Steve might have wanted to come in on this. Did you put a hand up, Steve?
It reminds me, I don't know commercial reality or best practice around buy one get one free, but I understand the story from a commercial point of view. Buy one get one free shifts more food, adds to your revenue, is good for business if that's your target. But if our real target is not just the commercial bottom line, then bog off is arguably a massive source of waste in the home in itself, because it's great to have a free second pack of peppers, but they're the ones that go off because we didn't really need them, and they're the ones that go in the bin. So it's very difficult to make the case to a retailer that says don't do commercial transactions like buy one get one free. But that's the kind of change we need to consider if we're serious.
Yeah, that's a great example of just driving consumer behaviour in the right way. On that point of the supermarkets, we had a question come in from the panel around the portion sizes of supermarkets. So how maybe that's driving food waste if they're only offering, for example, large portion sizes and you don't have a choice to offer something smaller. Maybe James, if I come to you, I'm sure there's practical reasons for that. Are there any ways that can be managed?
Yeah, and it comes from a position of trying to present value on the shelf. It's larger pack sizes, pounds per kg, or you buy packs of 4 chicken breasts versus individuals or doubles. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to offer a compelling price point. Not every household needs 4 chicken breasts, so there are an awful lot of people who live on their own, and one would be all they need for the entire week, and have a small freezer and therefore can't buy 4 and freeze the rest, which again some households have access to and opportunities to. So but at the same time, they've got a challenge in controlling range. You've seen the news this week as they're slashing their range to try and boost their profitability. So it is a difficult balance for them. I do understand that, but I think if there was more research done and read into the homes to understand, well, what are we throwing away, and educating consumers on, okay, that looks like good value, but if you throw half of it away every week, then is that actually good value? The more work could be done in that space to understand what consumers need, but also educate consumers as to what they need and what they should buy instead.
Great, thank you. We have another question that's kind of in a similar vein, and I'd like to come to you first on this, Steve. It's around where you've seen good examples of businesses, or particularly retailers in this question, doing good things in this space, maybe challenging the status quo and doing things differently.
Okay, good question. Some of our clients, I'm not sure if I should name names, but we work to get surplus to a number of the box schemes. Now, it's easy to think, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to get the wonky stuff through to one or other of the box schemes, and people that are insightful can make it work? So we avoid the retail chain and we go direct to consumer with fresh fruit boxes. These also, I have to say, to some extent, suffer from the same problems of buying too much. Personally, put my hand to this. We don't always eat everything in our box, but actually, it's a good example. And the principles, certainly, I would say, I think I'm fair to say that all of the box schemes that we supply through Ample with surplus food are very anxious to get surplus food. In fact, their policies are such that they would not buy non-surplus food. They refuse to accept crops that are grown to order, the exact opposite of what the big retailers do. So actually, there's an absolute policy here that says if the only time I'm going to pay you this food is if it would otherwise go to waste. So that kind of forward thinking, I think, is one really good example of how to really insist that we have to start to make change.
Yeah, that's a great example. Dan, James, any other ones you'd like to share?
Not that one, no.
We'll come to the next question then, which is another one actually more specific on the Felix project, Dan, around your kind of scope or areas that you service. So question is, does the Felix project collect frozen food from outside of London?
Yes, absolutely. Great question. We do. We absolutely collect frozen food from outside London. I should have said that we only deliver within London, but we do collect food from all over the UK, in all honesty, although it does tend to be clustered around London. We worked with King Charles last year to put in a huge new freezer in our depot, but also to put in freezers in lots of the charities that we deliver to. It was called the King's Freezer Project, and actually I think we managed to get around 800 fridges and freezers into community centres around the UK, because a problem that we were finding was that although we had the capacity to take lots of frozen food, the charities didn't have that frozen capacity, and so we couldn't keep the cold chain consistent, and it wasn't really working. Since that, we've really upscaled the amount of frozen that we do. So the answer is a resounding yes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Another question which is almost exactly one that I had written down myself, so thank you to whoever wrote this. We have a similar mind. Where do you see the balance of responsibility on food waste between governments, businesses and consumers? And maybe, Dan, if I can come back to you as you're working in the policy space.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic question, and my thoughts on this sometimes change, but I think one point that I think can illustrate this is I know that people on the call will be working within retail. I've had conversations with lots of retail as well. They will say, look, it's not our fault that we're following these practices that produce a lot of food waste. We're just reflecting what the consumer wants. And I think I sympathize with that to an extent, but I also want to say, well, who has influenced those consumer preferences. And the reason that we have consumer preferences the way they are is because of the practice of supermarkets over the last 40 years. And so, and without wanting to blame anyone, I do think that it's important that retailers accept their fair share of responsibility, and I also think government should be doing it for what it's worth. We get one thing that I think illustrates this really nicely is we take a lot of group volunteers out to the orchards, and one of the most common questions I get asked is, why do the apples look like this? They'll often have little bits of surface discoloration, blight, or what's called rust on apples, and they'll say, why don't they look like apples in the shop? And what I always want to tell people is the apples that you see in the shop aren't what apples look like. This is what apples look like, and the ones that you see in the shop have been very, very cosmetically selected. So yeah, I think there's others may want to comment on this. There's lots of different shares of responsibility, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that there is a need for a change on this, but perhaps others want to come in.
Happy to. Yeah, I totally agree with all the specifications, and I remember seeing in a grower what an acceptable pineapple looks like, and it was in a remarkably small percentage of all the pineapples that they were growing that was a UK ready pineapple, and the growers were mystified by it. This was in Ghana, but that was what they were working towards, and when you realise that that's what we're doing, it makes a massive impact. I think the thing that sort of emphasise where government and policy could help, when you see those policy shifts, when you see those rule shifts, and I love the one you referenced, I think it was Dan, you referenced about tax incentives for repurposing rather than using it in AD. Something small like that would massively drive behaviour in the right direction. And the only people who can make those sort of system-wide incentives and changes is government. And you know, that I think is, so are they responsible? No, but I think they could be doing more to influence the right behaviours. So harder, sort of nuanced answer.
Great. Now, I know there's more to say on all these topics, and Steve, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm conscious of the time. And so I'll finish off the session here. I know that it's been really interesting for me, and I hope it's been interesting for everyone listening. So just to say a big thank you to James, Steve and Dan for your contributions today, and of course to Luke and the FDF team for helping us set up this session, and to all the attendees who have engaged and listened today. In terms of follow-up, as Luke said, he is going to be sending out something with the recording and a few more bits of information about each of us either later today or tomorrow. So do look out for that. I know we've only scratched the surface on a massive topic here. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, then do reach out to any of us. I'm sure we'd be most welcome. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks
Thank you, Ray. Thanks, everyone. Bye.